Hi fellow addicts. Today we're going to learn how to do some quick soldering. I have an ESC here that I want to solder a Dean's connector on. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get the jig is up jig and place the positive wire in the jig. What you're going to want to make sure you do is get some solder. What I normally use when I'm soldering these types of electronics is the fine electric rosin core solder with a 60% tin and a 40% lead combination. First thing I start out with is I go ahead and I tin my wire. What that is you cut some of the covering back so that you have some exposed wire. Twist the wire together so that you don't get any fraying while you're soldering. Apply some heat to the wire to get it to melt the solder. Now, a little trick is if you touch the solder down close towards the gun and to the wire, it will actually melt into the wire a little quicker and you won't melt your covering on your wire. The next step is to take the Dean's connector. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be soldering on the shorter end of the Dean's connector. The end with the spring clips is the end that you connect to your batteries. One thing you'll notice about a Dean's connector is on the connector itself, you're going to notice that there is a positive symbol and a negative symbol right on the connector so that you won't mess that up. You want to make sure that you solder the red wire to the positive lead and the black wire to the negative lead. I think most of us know that, but it's good to make sure that we double and triple check it, because I've even caught myself sometimes starting to solder it to the wrong connector, and that would be very bad. Our next step is going to be to place the Dean's connector in the jigs up jig that I use, which I love. Anybody wanting to do any soldering, this is a good jig to use. It's very convenient. You load the Dean's connector into the jig, and what I'm going to start with is I'm going to start with the positive. The positive is this one here on top. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to tin your connector. And how you do that is you place your soldering iron, make sure that there's no excess solder on it when you do this. It should look nice and shiny just like that. What you're going to want to do is place the heat under the connector. Give it some heat for a second and then place the solder on the top. And what will happen as the heat transfers through the connector, that solder will start to melt. Now what we're looking for is a nice little pool of solder that should set right on top of that connector. That's where we're going to solder the wire to. If you take a look at it, you can see I've got just a nice little puddle of solder right there on the end. Okay, my next step is I'm going to go ahead and take my wire shrink wrap and I'm going to place my wire shrink wrap on the wire. Now trust me, from somebody that does this all the time, that is very often forgotten and you end up having to unsolder your connector to put the shrink wrap on. So try to make sure to remember, and I know it's tough because I forget it all the time myself, to put the wire shrink wrap on the end of the wire before you solder. You'll see why later. Now, here's the easy part. All you need to do is heat the connector up on the bottom side until the solder becomes a metallic silver. It'll change from cloudy to metallic. Now once you touch the wire that it's already been tinned, has solder on it, to that connector, the heat will flow up into the wire and melt the solder that you already put on the wire. What this does is it makes sure that the wire and the connector have solder going between each. If you fail to do this, you're going to get what they call a cold joint. This is not good. This is not something you want to see. What you want to see is you want to see a nice even distribution of solder all the way around the connector where it connects with the connector. I'm noticing on this one that I'm not getting the flow that I want. So what I will do oftentimes is I will take just a tiny bit of solder, there we go. What you're looking for is a nice even solder flow all the way around. That solder is going to flow to where the heat is applied to. So if you apply the heat to the underside, what that does is it pulls that solder down from the wire so that you get a nice solid solder joint. This soldering joint will not fail. You will not have any problems with losing power to your model. The next and final step, you slide your heat shrink wrap over your soldering joint, apply heat to it with a lighter, and there you go. You have a nice clean solder joint that will last for years, and you should never have any problems with this type of joint. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to like 5x5 Aviation on Twitter, Pinterest, and Facebook.